Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome once again. This is our, I think, sixth session like this with Peter. He's generous enough to donate his time, and we pick up on him periodically. It's great to have him here. And before we get started, I thought we'd just introduce ourselves. The admin team is mostly here, and then we'll introduce Peter, and then we'll get started. So I'm Don Newman. I teach algebra in a all-boys K-12 private school in Baltimore, Maryland. And I've been doing BTC for 4 years. I'll be starting my 5th year soon.
Hi, I'm Abigail Bates. I'm also one of the admin for this group, and I teach high school math in Central California, in Stockton to be exact. And this year I'm teaching Math 3 and a support class for Integrated Math 1.
Hi, I'm Jill Weiss, and I teach middle school math in Chicago Public Schools. This year I'm specifically teaching 8th in algebra, and this is about my 4th year too, I believe.
Hi, I'm Dana Carey. I teach 7th grade math. I'm in the Nashville, Tennessee area, and this is my 4th year with Building Thinking Classrooms, and I am a moderator for the group.
Hi, my name is Monica Harrell. I am about an hour and a half north of Houston in Texas, and I am going into my 3rd year teaching science, although I taught math 6 years before that. So I've been working through BTC for about 6 years now.
And of course, Peter is here. I don't know. I don't think you need any introduction, but Peter obviously is the author of the Building Thinking Classroom series of books now, and he is worldwide, right? Where are you currently, Peter?
So right now I'm coming to you from Sydney, Australia.
Sydney, Australia.
It is 6 a.m. here tomorrow morning, so I'm ahead of, I think, most of you. There might be someone here from Australia. And I'll just keep with the theme. I'm in my 20th year of teaching BTC. And thanks for having me. Thanks for making time for these sorts of sessions. I think I really, really enjoy the format of it and being able to connect with you and all of the people who join us in these sessions. I love the questions too that are coming out of this.
And our questions primarily today are going to come from the results of the poll that we posted. Thanks for those of you that responded to the poll questions that we put up. Thanks to those of you that added your own questions. And we can't take all of the questions, but we're going to go through as many as we can. So the first question is, Peter, there's a lot of elementary teachers in particular who pull small groups to help with differentiated instruction. Can you talk a little bit about how that fits in with BTC in general?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna answer that question from a couple of different perspectives. So first of all, one of the things that the research showed when we were doing random groups is it had a profound effect on the student self-efficacy. Because when we do random groups, what students are hearing is that we see them all as capable. We see them all as the same. And they actually tell us this in interviews, that when we do random groups, we are showing them that we have confidence in them in a way that we are not showing them when we do sort of strategic grouping, specifically around differentiation when we make ability groups, right? Because the students are hearing the messages we send when we say things like, this group's going to work on this advanced task, and this group's going to work on this task, and this group here, they're going to work with me, right? So we have to be a little bit conscientious about the way we're using sort of strategic groups or differentiated instruction in how it positions the students in their own mind, but also within the classroom. Having said that, differentiated instruction is an incredibly important part of teaching and learning mathematics. All our students are not at the same level, and we as teachers have to spend a fair bit of time making sure that we are bringing students up to standard, so to speak. So how does small group instruction fit in, I think, in classroom? So one way it fits is to say that it doesn't. Let's just say that we run the lesson using random groups. We do all of that launch, the body, the closing using random groups. And then outside of that structure, we might create some small group instruction. And in the blue book, which is a really thin book, which is really just about how to fit building thinking classrooms into sort of atypical spaces. I talk about how to do small group instruction in two different ways. So there's small group instruction when students have different types of unfinished learning, right? So we get students, they come to us in all different, with all different abilities. They have gaps, unfinished learning. So different students have different unfinished learning. So I may pool a group of students and work on their particular unfinished learning. And I also talk about, well, what if their unfinished learning is all the same? So for example, let's say I did the lesson, and then at the end of the lesson, I feel like there's 3 students who really need a bit more support on this lesson. How do I use small group instruction in that setting? Either way, one way to think about that is to think about it as outside of the BTC lesson structure. Another way to think about it is that's a great time to pull the students and work on that unfinished learning is when everybody else is sitting doing those sort of check your understanding questions, right? So I can pull a group of students when everyone else is working on their check your understanding. I can pull a group of students and kind of focus on that. A more powerful way of thinking about small group instruction is to think about the random groups that you're working with as each one is a small group, each one with its particular needs, right? And a constellation of needs. So a small group of students is got diversity within it. And that when I interact with that group, when I enter into a group and I'm going to interact with them, what can I do to help them as a group? What can I do to help individuals within that group? Right? Without disrupting that sort of whole class BTC structure. So one of the things that I'm always doing when I'm in classrooms, and I'm in classrooms often, is I'll step into a group and I kind of do a check to see what their understanding is. That starts before I even start talking to them. I'm listening to them, I'm observing them. And then I may give a hint or a suggestion that the whole group can chew on. But I may also step into a group because I see that there's one student who my sense is that they're not fully understanding what's going on. So I may step in and I may ask a very clarifying question. I may ask a question that the group has to now answer to me. And as a way of, and in doing that, it's a way to make sure that everybody is being caught up, especially if someone's being pushed out the back. But I may also do something like grab a student and pull them out for a little bit and work with them individually, kind of behind the scenes, and then catch them up to what their group is doing and then put them back in. So thinking about that small group instruction as not so much the way it's been characterized as I'm going to make ability groups, but as a way of thinking about how can I support students in real time during a BTC lesson and then sort of after the fact in a BTC lesson. I have one more thing to say about that. So I worked with a middle school last year that had an amazing intervention program. So what they were doing was they had students who were being pulled out of other subjects and being given an extra block in mathematics. And the person who was working on that intervention space, rather than coming in and sort of patching the gaps that the students had, the unfinished learning, that interventionist worked very closely with the classroom teachers. And their question was always, what are you teaching the next lesson? And then in those intervention sessions, they would work very closely with the students to make sure that the students were ready and ahead of that lesson that was coming, so that when they were in their regular math class with their peers, they were actually an asset to groups. They were coming into that group work. They were ready for it. They had ideas and suggestions that they could offer their group immediately. And this was tremendously impactful for their self-confidence and their self-efficacy and their view of themselves, their identity in mathematics. So short question, long answer. Sorry about that.
Okay, so we're doing the thinking tasks and the thin slicing, but what kind of role or how would we incorporate retrieval practice, spiral reviews, and those kind of things into this whole thinking tasks and thin slicings that we've got going on all the time?
Yeah, so this is something that I run into quite often when I'm in classrooms and when I'm working with teachers in classrooms. For many curricula, it's really baked into the curriculum sometimes. They'll be working on something like fractions, and then you turn the page and then there's some retrieval work on multiplying single digit numbers, and then back to the regular scheduled program and so on. We find those to be that kind of a practice where we're going to disrupt the learning in the moment, to do retrieval practice, to be incredibly disruptive to the students' cognitive thinking and development around a concept, especially when they're first grappling with that concept, right? Could you imagine you're trying to get your head around adding fractions or solving two-step equations, and all of a sudden there's a sort of retrieval interruption on long division or whatever it is, right? It's really disruptive, and it really disrupts that cognitive load. Having said that, it is really important. I call it microspiraling. Microspiraling is this sort of that coming back to ideas that are from before. Not so much that we want to keep it always on the forefront of the brain, but so that these things don't get too dormant, right? And it is a great way to work on unfinished learning, right? Because often these are the things that the students need more work on. So microspiraling, in my mind, comes in a couple of different forms. One is, let's say I did a lesson yesterday and I got this far. So what do I do today? Do I just start up where I left off and keep going? No, I'm going to back up. We're going to revisit some of the concepts from yesterday, and we're going to go further. And then the next day, I'm going to back up and I'm going to revisit a few topics and ideas, and then we're going to go further. So there's that micro spiraling that's more immediate, right? We're never going to launch a lesson on the assumption that everything from yesterday was remembered, right? And in fact, that metaphor, there's this metaphor that we use often in building thinking classrooms, which is I want to back the train up. I want to back up the train as far as necessary into the station to get all my students onto the train. And then we leave the station. And now my job is to keep everybody on the train, right? So, and that's sort of the same thing with, I got this far yesterday. I can't assume that everybody learned or remembered everything from yesterday. So I'm going to back the train back up into the station. We're going to do a quick couple of questions early on that are similar to yesterday before we move forward, right? Always that backing up. And I think every teacher knows that if you launch a lesson on the assumption that students remember something from yesterday or last week or last month or last year, this lesson's not going to go well. So this sort of micro spiraling happens in the launch a lot, right? We want to bring that back. We want to bring back the ideas, back up that train as far as possible to get the students ready for today's lesson. The next part of microspiraling happens in terms of what I call knowledge mobility. And I'll give a really concrete example of this. So I was working with a teacher, I think 6th or 7th grade teacher, and they were just starting a unit on fractions. And that was what they were going to be spending the next 3 weeks on. And my comment, and we were like, I was going to be co-teaching with the teacher day 1 of this unit. And I said, haven't they learned all this? Right? Like they've been doing fractions since they were 6. Haven't they learned all of these operations and everything there is to learn about fractions? And the teacher's comment was, yeah, but they don't remember it, right? They don't know it. They don't know it. And I said, are we sure they don't know it? Because when we use the word they, that teacher and I were using it very differently, right? He was using it as they, as a collection of individuals, with each individual doesn't know it. Right. And I was using they as the collective. As a collective, I'm pretty sure they know it. And he was convinced that they don't, and I was convinced that they do. So what we decided to do was we did the review lesson from the end of the unit, right? So we were going to take the lesson, we were going to take questions from the entire unit, and we were just going to do a review activity in this first lesson of the unit. And review activities in thinking classrooms look a little different than a typical lesson. So if it's a review activity, let's say I have 8 groups in my class, what we do is we set up 10 boards. And before the students come in, at every board, there is a mild question posted at every board. A different question. Every board has a different question, right? But they're all mild. But they're from across the whole unit, right? So the students get a card, they go to their board, they answer the question that's at that board. When they've answered the question at that board, they erase their work, and then they run, if they wish, or they can walk to an empty board. And this is why you need 2 empty boards, right? 2 extra boards, then there are groups. And so it goes, they ping pong around the room. And like, these kids love this. They just love going to the next board, and they go to any empty board until they've more or less exhausted all of the mild questions. When that happens, we add a medium question to every board. We keep the mild one up there because some groups haven't quite gotten through everything yet. And then when they get through the milds, we add the spicy. And then at the end of the lesson, the students had done 30 questions and they've covered the entire unit. And the teacher's like, what do I do for the next 3 weeks? And this is a form of that sort of recall, that micro spiraling, but it's a repositioning of the idea of the they, right? From the you to the they. You may not have all the knowledge, but you collectively have all the knowledge. And what was happening was that the knowledge was just mobilized, right? Every student maybe didn't have the whole picture, but among the groups, there was enough of the whole picture to figure it out. And you would see groups cluster together and try to get through a really tough one and share the knowledge and so on. And by the end of the lesson, they had all done it. Have they all mastered everything? No, but we certainly don't need to spend 3 weeks on this now, treating every individual as if they don't know it, right? So one of the ways to think about this micro spiraling is, where is the knowledge in the room and how can we mobilize it? And Kyle Webb, Megan Giroux, and I have actually done some thinking around this idea around, for example, diagnostics, right? We tend to do diagnostics to tell us where the gaps are, where the unfinished learning is. But what if we used a diagnostic to tell us if there was enough knowledge in the room that we could just mobilize that knowledge, right? It's a very different way of thinking about it. Other ways to think about micro spiraling is to think about, and this is a privilege of middle school teachers, I feel, is that you teach a topic in September. Well, that topic's coming up for the rest of the year, right? Like you're doing fractions. Well, we're going to have fractions in algebra. We're going to have fractions in graphing. We're going to have fractions in word problems. We're going to have fractions. Like fractions just keep popping up. And to think about how concepts that you learn early in the year or even last year can stay alive, not by doing explicit treatment of them, but just embedding them within future work, right? So that's another form of that micro spiraling. And then finally, there is an opportunity to do that sort of retrieval work at the beginning of any lesson that you want, right? Like a lesson, a class period begins when the bell rings, but your BTC lesson begins when you decide that it begins and you're going to launch. So if you want to spend 5 minutes having the students engaged in some other work ahead of time, a really popular thing to do is some number talks or estimate 180, like these sorts of things before I'm going to start my lesson. But those are all different ways that we can think about those things being embedded. The only one thing I would say is that once the BTC lesson begins, to not disrupt that learning, by changing the channel, so to speak, and to also always be aware of what the cognitive load on the students is, right? Like just because they've seen it before doesn't mean it's an easy lift for them. Right. So just pay attention to those things. And I hope that helps answer that question.
That helped a lot. I didn't know about this jumping from board to board thing. I need to get a handle on that.
Oh, yeah. The kids, they will finish that review session sweaty.
Yeah.
Like they just love it. And you see immediately where the groups are really hung up on. And that gives you, going back to the previous question, a great opportunity to go in and do some direct intervention in spaces where the hangups are.
Awesome. So as BTC has grown in popularity, can you give us 1 or 2 examples of using BTC in other subjects? I know we have some ELA peeps in here, and I'm hoping some science peeps have joined me.
So sure. So I'm currently, I just finished the first week of this, but I'm running 2 Rocket PD online workshop series. Each one is 3 weeks. This one is in math, and the other one is cross-curricular. So last week we did some cross-curricular ones, and we did a social studies activity followed by a language arts activity. This week coming up, we're going to do a what are we going to do? I think we're going to do a language arts and another history activity, and we got a science one planned for the last week. So what does it look like? Well, in many cases, it looks exactly the same as it would in a math thinking classroom, right? It still has a launch, a body, and a closing, right? We're still going to use random groups of 3. We're going to get them to the whiteboards. We're going to give them something to think about. We're defronting the classroom. We're avoiding answering their questions. We are being very purposeful in the questions we select. We're having a consolidation, which is really, or a closing, which is really important. What changes is what is the thinking task, right? And there is a lot of different ways to position that, but I'm going to just give a metaphor or 2 metaphors to help think about this, and then I'll give some particular examples. So, in math, we tend to think about that flow staircase, right? Even in the response to the question beforehand, I was talking about that backing up the train. So if I got this far, then I'm going to back up the train. And really what I'm drawing is that flow staircase from chapter 9, right? Which is as their ability increases, I increase their challenge, and so on. And that works really great in math. It works really great in physics and parts of chemistry like stoichiometry, where we can think of the topic that we're teaching as a sequence of increasingly more challenging tasks, right? But language arts, social studies doesn't work that way per se, right? Like the task can get harder, but what actually makes a task harder? Likewise, parts of science like earth science doesn't work that way. So the metaphor I use when I'm thinking about other subjects is I either think about peeling an onion, so I'm peeling back the layers, or I'm digging deeper. So those are the metaphors I tend to try to focus in on when I'm trying to design or co-teach a language arts, social studies, science lesson, right? I'm trying to go deeper. And in many ways, our resources in different subjects are already set up that way, right? Like if you think about language arts, for example, text to self, text to world, text to text is just an example of going deeper, right? Like text to self is the easiest, right? It's the most obvious. Text to world is the second one. We're going deeper. Text to text, we're going really deep, right? If we're looking at things like plot versus theme versus character development, right? We're going deeper. In social studies, we're looking at things like what actually was the event, what are the consequences of that event, right? Or looking at like irony or tension that comes out of that, or inference, which is really going deeper and harder, right? Like what is this? What are the implications of this? So in many ways, a lot of the sort of instructional routines and curriculum designs that exist in other subjects already are sort of positioned in this way, right? But let's take a look at some examples. So here's an example of going deeper. So I did this one last week. We were analyzing a piece of text, right? So I gave a piece of text. It wasn't very long, and it was poetic in nature. Let's call it. It wasn't a poem, but it had that sort of elements of poetry. And the first task was, I want you in a group to decide what this piece of text is about, right? So that's it. Like just read it and decide what it's about. What is the central idea? So that's task number 1. Come up with a central idea. Task number 2, now evidence it from using evidence from the text, right? Like you've come up with this central idea. What is the evidence that supports that this is what this is about? And they were actually rewriting parts of the text and sort of building this sort of mind map around that, right? And what's really interesting is when the students do this, because I've done this activity with students, is that they naturally develop a way of representing differently literal evidence versus inferential evidence, right? So this is the thing that the text actually says. This is what I think that means, and this is how that contributes to that central idea. And you see different groups developing different ways of representing that, but it is an absolutely great way to introduce the difference between literal and inference. The next one was, this text had, like, it's just one text. It's when the text originally had a line break in it. Where's the line break and why? And then, oh, did I say one line break? I meant 2 line breaks, right? Like, so why is that? Why is that the places where the text breaks, right? Like, we can think of it in terms of paragraphs. We can think of it in terms of the shift in voice, the shift from passive to active. We can talk about the shift in pronouns we're shifting throughout the text, right? And those are examples of just going deeper and deeper and deeper into the text. And one of the nice things about that kind of an activity is that the biggest cognitive load around text analysis is the reading of the text, right? Like, the students, like, reading text is such a heavy cognitive load. This is true of word problems as well, by the way. And I'll mention how I do word problems in a math classroom. So rather than changing the text constantly and having them do a new analysis, can we just stay with the one piece of text and analyze it deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper? Right. So there is an example. So, and there's particular structures around that work on this idea that we're peeling back the layers and we're going deeper and deeper and deeper. Now, another example was I did a lesson last year. It was in a middle school classroom. We were looking at the greatest inventions of the 20th century. And we had 10 inventions. And the way it went was they were given 2. Okay, so we gave them 2 inventions just on slips of paper, and their task was simple. They have to sort the significance of these inventions. They were not allowed to Google anything. They just had to sort it. So we gave them 2 to begin with, and they had to put them in order, most significant to least significant. Now, we were very specific about what we meant by significant. Well, I shouldn't say very specific, but we said significant at the time the invention happened, right? So not necessarily significant now, but significant when the invention happened. So they got 2, and then they put them in order. Then they got a 3rd. They put that where they thought it belonged, and they got 4th, and they kept going and going and going until they had 10. And then we gave them a document that had a little bit of text about each invention and why it was significant at the time of the invention, right? And we didn't ask them to read the whole document. We just said, we want you to read about the top 3 on your list and the bottom 3 on your list. And after you've read about that, you feel free to reorder it if you want. Every group reordered, by the way, right? Because there were things that they were assuming, but they didn't know, like the radio. Like, the radio doesn't seem very significant nowadays, but at the time of invention, it was incredibly significant, right? Rockets, yeah, okay, it seems like a good pastime, but like, think about the impact that it had on communication and so on and so forth, right? So it was these sorts of things. And then we can shift that to, okay, well, what impact have these inventions had on today's society, right? And so on and so forth. And again, we're just going deeper and deeper and deeper. At first, it's just like, what do you think? What do you like better, right? Like, it's very superficial, very surface-like. And then we're going deeper. Now read about it, try to understand it, think about the significance, think about how it's contributed, right? And so on and so forth. So it's that sort of peeling back the layers. I said I was going to link this back to the math, but I forgot what I was going to say. So
Word problems.
Oh, word problems. Thank you. So one of the things that is, like, if you've read anything I've written, you've learned that I have a particular view of word problems, and they're called word problems because all the problems with the words, right? That once we get through the words, often the mathematics is relatively simple. Now, that's not always true. And if it's not true, then I would classify the task as something more than a word problem. Then it would probably be some sort of thinking task and so on and so forth. But a word problem is particularly about that decoding. And students, they don't like word problems. It's a huge cognitive load to do that decoding. So whenever I introduce word problems in a classroom, and I do this a lot, and it seems like February is the month to do it, because when I'm in classrooms in February, it's like everyone's doing word problems. All right, so we're doing word problems in February. I'll look through the resource that the teacher is using, and I'll pick one word problem. And then I'll just say, this is a great word problem. we're going to stay with this word problem for half the lesson. And what I'll do is I'll give the word problem verbally as a story. And then I just keep changing the numbers in it, right? And I'm changing the numbers. Maybe I'm changing what's the unknown and so on, but it's always the same context. The story is the same. So the cognitive load is not on the decoding of the story. The kids build up this real affinity and this competency around being able to solve. And then all of a sudden, we're about halfway through the lesson. I go, oh, so I'll give you an example. I was doing one around, they were two-step problems where they had to multiply and add or divide and subtract. Like they had to do something with the numbers, but they were all word problems, and every word problem was a nightmare. So I just picked one, and it was about golf balls, right? And I'm like, well, do you guys know I own a sporting goods store back in Vancouver? I don't work at it. I just own it. We have all these golf balls. Last time I checked, my manager told me we had 200 golf balls in stock, but he just texted me this morning and told me we got 10 boxes of 12 balls came in. How many golf balls do we now have? And off they went, and they had to solve that. And then as they solved it, I just got another text from my manager. We just got 8 boxes of 15 in. Oh, we just got another. Oh, we sold 6 boxes of 8. And like, it's just going like this. And then all of a sudden it's like, now we're selling tennis balls, and they get a word problem on paper. And now we're selling t-shirts, and now we're selling chocolate, and now comes in all of those other word problems from the textbook. But before that came in, I'd reduced the cognitive load on the decoding, increased their competency on the math. And then as the math was already high, I could start increasing the complexity of the word problems, right? And one of the mistakes we always make is we go, bam, and we shouldn't, right? And this is true of language arts as well. If we want to do deep analysis, we have to reduce the cognitive load on the reading to begin with. Anyway, sorry, I went on way too long for that one.
It's fabulous.
We have other members advocating for their groups, such as the ELA space. So any member who's listening, who is in a different space, just keep reading the chat, and we have groups advocating. The next question has to do with outside tools, Peter. So what place do outside tools such as Desmos or Delta Math have in the BTC framework?
So, one of the things that I always say is that the world doesn't need more tasks, and there's irony in that, and we're going to talk about that later. But the world, like your resources, whether that is Desmos or Delta Math or Magma or your curriculum, is full of tasks, and you should be pulling on those resources as much as possible. My only statement around that is, do you serve the resource, or does the resource serve you? And I hope that you're landing on the latter of those, because if you are landing on the latter of those, then what you're going to do is you're going to tap into all of those resources as a way for you to bolster your teaching, whether you're doing thinking classrooms or not. I think every teacher should be doing this, right? They should be engaging with their resources, and I lump curriculum in that and textbooks in with that, as a way to help support you in delivering the best lesson that you possibly can for your students, right? The resources, the curriculum, the text serve you, not the other way around, right? So what place do they play in? They are rich resources. You should tap into them as many different ways as you can, but always with the lens on what is your purpose. So if you're building a thinking classroom lesson, use those resources to create a thin slice sequence. Right? Use those resources to provide students with check your understanding questions, right? Use those resources to help design a formative quiz, right? You should definitely be using these resources as much as possible. But you should always be doing so with an eye to what you think is best for your learners in that moment.
And before we go on to the next question, thank you for reiterating that BTC is not a curriculum, because that is often a misconception with new members.
Yeah, it is not. It is a pedagogy, and it should wrap itself around any pedagogy or any curriculum, provided you're using that curriculum as something that serves you, because then you get to bring your pedagogy to it.
Thanks, Peter. So we had a couple of questions in the poll about notes and consolidation. And so we were wondering first if there's any updates to those items, and second, about how much time should be given to those things during a lesson.
Okay, so ironically, I think the second question is the update. So first of all, I need to differentiate between, and this is a common misunderstanding, the difference between closing and consolidation. So a lesson has three parts, right? It's got the launch. This is where I'm going to initiate the activity. I'm going to get the students going. And there's very particular ways that we do that, and that it should take less than 5 minutes. Then there's a body. This is the time that the kids are working at the whiteboards in their groups. And of course, you are providing support, scaffolding, and extensions during that time. You're working the room, right? And then we get into the closing. Now, the closing is everything that happens when I take back control of the lesson, right? And why is this important? So this is important because when the number one misunderstanding about thinking classrooms is that BTC is all about the whiteboards, right? Yeah, okay. It is the most obvious. It's the sexy practice, right? It's the one that is visibly different. But what we have to understand when the kids are working at the whiteboards is it's not all gold, right? It just isn't all gold. The kids are having incomplete thoughts, incorrect thoughts. They're unorganized, unstructured, informal. The kids are working at the whiteboards. They're meaning making. This is super, super important. And they're thinking, and this is also super important. But their ideas are kind of floating out here, untethered, right? They haven't been pinned down yet. And if we run the clock out with the kids at the whiteboards, what happens is the bell rings and the kids walk out of the room with their ideas floating out here. And what happens is they just float away. And then they're back the next day and they're like, never seen this before. I don't know what you're talking about. So the closing is super important because this is where I'm going to take control of the lesson and I'm going to make sure we stick that landing. We get everybody. So one of the metaphors I've been using is the launch is a tee off. Right? We're on the tee box on the golf course. The launch is a tee off. I'm hoping it's going down the fairway. Who knows where it's going to go? It could get out into the rough or to the weeds. And that's why I'm working as a teacher to try to get them back onto the fairway, right? But now the kids are responsible. They're working on their own, trying to get onto the green, right? And I'm working the room, trying to get everybody onto the green.
Oh, Jude?
But now we're heading into the closing. And my job now in the closing is to get everybody into the hole, right? So I'm going to take control of the lesson in the closing, and I'm going to make sure that all of those unorganized, unstructured, informal ideas, those incomplete and incorrect thoughts, I'm going to take charge of this. I'm going to make sure we complete and correct any incomplete thought and incorrect thoughts. And I'm going to really work at organizing, structuring, and formalizing their thinking. Now, this is not a lecture. This is me it's about shifting their meaning making into meaning made and shifting their thinking into learning. And there are three ways we do this. We do it with consolidation, and consolidation looks two different ways. If it's a divergent task, meaning everyone did it different, we're going to do a gallery walk. If it's a convergent task, we're going to gather at a whiteboard and we're going to do some more questions together as a group. But it's not my opportunity to do a lecture. It's a lot of turn and talking and pulling from the kids. So consolidation is one. Notes is another. Okay, and we have very particular note structures, that 4-quadrant, example 1, example 2, example 3, and things to remember that you saw in the green book. And then check your understanding questions using that mild, medium, spicy structure. I think the biggest update to this work is recognizing how important it is. It is such an important part of the lesson, and we're seeing so much better retention of learning and completion and correction of learning if we do a really good closing. And it's so important that we dedicate 1/3 of the lesson to it. So if I'm doing a 60-minute lesson, 20 minutes is closing. If I'm doing a 48-minute lesson, 16 minutes is closing. I will dedicate 1/3 of the lesson to the closing, because the closing is we turn the meaning making into meaning made and turn the thinking into learning. And that sort of retained learning that the students can take with them and bring back. So there isn't any really big updates beyond what's in the green book, but the green book is a huge update compared to what's in the orange book, right? So this is really important, and to pay attention to it. Do not run out the clock. Every lesson has to have a closing, even if you don't finish all of the content, right? Let's say you only get this far. You want to get that far, but you only got this far. We're still spending a third closing. Back up the train, go further the next day. Close, because if you don't close the lesson, like a third seems like a long time. And teachers are always balking at that. And my comment to this is, look, if you don't take the time to close the lesson, everything that came before it was a waste of time. We have to close the lesson.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And I know that if you haven't seen the green book or don't have it yet, there's also a new book coming out soon in October. Is that right, Peter? October? Okay, so in October.
Yeah, first week of October, we call it the Burgundy book.
Yep, the Burgundy book, because it's going to cover tasks specifically for grades 6 through 12. There's a bunch of really amazing tasks in there. I got to get a little sneak peek of the book, and it was it's amazing.
Which was your favorite?
I'm super excited. My favorite task?
Yeah.
Oh, I really like. Am I allowed to? I can say.
Yeah. Go ahead.
There's I don't know if you guys ever did this when you were kids, but when I was a kid, there's that little problem where you like try to trace a house without lifting your pencil, like a little. Okay, and so there's a task that's the launch, and then it continues to get harder and more complex problems. And I'm super excited to try that out with my students. And it even goes into a little bit of graph theory and all kinds of fun stuff. But you could also keep it simple as well. So I think that's the one I'm probably most excited to try.
Yeah.
But all those questions.
Great task to get kids going on.
Yes. I wanted to mention, though, Peter referenced 2 different closing structures. And so if you are like, wait, what were those things that he was talking about with the gallery walk and the ordering and naming closing strategies, those are also in that book and in the green book. So if you guys want to read more about that, you could check those out as well.
Yeah. So Kyle and I had a great time writing that Burgundy book. It's been a long time coming. People have been waiting for that 6 to 12 book. It's 20 non-curricular tasks, but a task is an entire lesson. Like, it gives you everything you need, right? It gives you the launch script. It gives you all the extensions. It gives you students' worked solutions. And then it gives you sort of our author notes on it. That's for the non-curriculars. For the curricular, it gives you the full thin slice sequence. It gives you the consolidation, the note template. It gives you your check your understanding questions. It gives you everything you need. And there's 30 curricular tasks.
Yeah, it's really cool, even though it's not like a full curriculum. Oh, I think my internet is bugging out. But it does give you that idea of what a full lesson looks like, which is super helpful when we're planning and creating our own lessons or adapting our own textbook. And there was a couple questions in the chat. Yes, it is available for pre-order right now. So if you go to the Corwin website, you can pre-order the website. And someone asked if the format is similar to the green book. Yes, the format is very similar to the green book, but all the tasks are for secondary. And I feel like there's a few differences, like at the beginning when you're using like the examples of the notes and things, everything is secondary. Some of the wording was a little bit different, but very generalized structures the same.
And in part 4 of the book, we do a way deeper dive into how to build your own thin slice sequences.
Yes.
Right. Like even beyond what's in the green book. So that's one of the advantages. It's thick. It's going to be thicker than the green book. We didn't know that at the time, but we're being told.
Yeah, but it's great. You guys should check it out.
So Peter, I've been privileged. The book is not only the new thing you're coming out with. Can you tell them a little bit about what I've got to help the back end on?
Yeah. So to me, this has been really exciting. One of the things that I've been working a lot on for the last 2 or 3 years is trying to create access for teachers to building thinking classrooms. For those of you who've been sort of following along at home, you'll notice that, about a year ago, you saw a massive update to the quality of the website and the amount of things that are available on the website, right? So that's my efforts to make one of my efforts to create access for teachers to have access to resources. Another one is engaging in these types of webinars and doing lots and lots of podcasts. I love doing those, but it's also a way of giving teachers access to building thinking classrooms. I don't ever want someone's ability to do BTC to be limited by their ability to get to, for example, the NCTM conference or something like that, right? Like I want to make sure that the new stuff is out there and available for people to get access to as quickly as it's emerging for us. And one of the things that I've often worried about is the fact that there are teachers who would love to do a BTC workshop, but they work in a place where that is infeasible, financially not possible or even time-wise for me. I can't be everywhere. Right now I'm in Australia and I'm still not able to meet the demands of what Australia and New Zealand wants out of me here, right? So I started working about a year ago on a Grassroots workshop. Grassroots Workshops is a company owned by Robert Kaplinski, where it's online video workshops. And I partnered with Mike Flynn, who did all the video production. So the Grassroots Workshop is 84 videos, and it takes you through everything you need to know about building thinking classrooms from the very, very beginning to the very, very end. And it's broken into 6 modules, 22 lessons, and it's just such a, we think it's a good workshop, but I want to hear from the people whose cameras are on, because you've all had a chance to engage with it. And Monica has had a chance to engage with it from the back end, being a huge help in creating the actual web structure of it and being a community monitor for that workshop. So maybe we can hear from some of the people who have engaged in it.
I'm about halfway through the workshop and I love the videos. They are long enough to include all the details, but short enough that I can process the topic being viewed. There's a forum where we can answer and respond to each other as far as reflection questions. And what I was surprised about also is even underneath the main video for the lesson you're watching, there's a lot of frequently asked questions with videos under those. So it's a plethora of videos, really helpful.
That was actually one of the big moves that we made, was we decided to make the FAQs an expanded menu of every question is a different video. So there's way more than 84, but that allows you to see what is the question, and now here's Peter's answers to it. And so it's not, you don't have to watch a 15-minute FAQ video to get one answer. You can actually see what is the question, and there's the video for it.
And I'm a visual and auditory person versus reading everything. So I love the format. Thank you.
Oh, great.
My favorite thing about the FAQs is that even when I was listening to questions that didn't necessarily apply to me, it was really awesome to hear the answers, because she would throw tidbits inside of them. And the visuals on the later parts in the grading, if you have questions about the rubrics, seeing Peter talk about the rubrics with the visuals being on the screen, it makes it so clear to understand what you're trying to get across.
Nice.
I actually went all the way through the entire workshop this past week or so. And I've been doing BTC for 4 years. And even though a lot of what I was listening to and watching on the videos was stuff I've already been doing, it just is either a really good reminder, or there is some new stuff that's embedded in there that really makes you think about, looking at what you've been doing and maybe changing your practices. That's one. The other is I asked a couple of pretty kind of specific detailed questions, and I got responses from Peter in some cases very quickly. So it was really terrific.
Yeah, I think Don, I think you're the first one to actually get all the way through the workshop so far. It's yeah, you had great questions, and the questions are there, they're coming up. But what's really nice about that community platform is that when Don asks a question, everyone can see that question and everyone gets to see that answer, right? Like, so it builds up that real sort of knowledge mobility, a way of mobilizing that knowledge. Like, Would I love to come to every jurisdiction in the world and do a building thinking classroom in-person workshop? Yes, I still believe that that is the best way to understand what building thinking classrooms is. But this is such a close approximation. Like we spent, this was between Christmas and New Year's last year in Massachusetts. We were actually in a middle school that was empty, and we were rearranging classrooms to show how it evolves as you build your thinking classroom, how the classroom changes over time as you're implementing these practices. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I know there was, Peter, I don't know how you're feeling about time, but there was a question we had to skip earlier for grading. Do you think you have a couple extra minutes to do that?
Yeah, so there was a question around, what was it now again? What was the question?
Trying to find, just make sure I don't say it wrong. Oh, about fitting in like BTC grading with like schools grading policies, because some jurisdictions or districts have certain requirements.
Yeah. So BTC grading, to be honest, BTC grading is standards-based grading or outcomes-based grading, depending on where you live. So it's not like it's unique that way. What I bring to it is sort of a unique set of metaphors and justifications for why we need to do this, and then some pragmatics on how to set that up. But this can be really antithetical to what's expected of us as teachers. Like grading at its best is chaotic, right? There is so much contradiction in there. The idea that we have to in some way suck all the complexity of a student and their performance on a wide variety of complex mathematics down to a single percentage or letter grade is farcical at best, right? Like it just is not a real thing in that way, but it is a thing that we have to do because of where we work and because of the sort of societal expectation that students get graded. And you know, this is all harkens back to the beginning of the IQ test over 100 years ago, where there was a belief that by putting a number on a person, we can actually judge, you know, deem their worth and so on. But we have to do this. It's a necessary evil. The one thing I will say is this, is that I talk about the two-headed monster in the Orange Book. The two-headed monster is that almost every jurisdiction I work in, there's somebody at senior admin who's saying we are moving in the direction of standards-based grading. And then there's someone else at senior admin who says, and to help you with that, we're giving you a digital version of a 1970s grade book that parents are going to have continuous access to. And so this is that two-headed monster. We live in a space where the messages are mixed and our desires may not always align with what is being expected of us. So the one thing I will say is this, whatever your expectations are for you where you work, we have to see them as a minimum, not as a maximum. So you may work in a setting where you have to report out on a student's grade as a percentage, and it has to be continuously accessible. But that doesn't also prevent you from then doing standards-based grading where you're gathering data and the students have access to where that data is and seeing how they're progressing and what they have to work on. The fact that we have to have a continuous reporting out doesn't negate the fact that we can also do standards-based grading, right? Likewise, the fact that we have to report out only on students' attainment on quizzes and tests, for example, doesn't prevent us from also providing feedback to students around competencies using the rubrics in chapter 12, right? Like, so just think about those things, that it's way more complex than that, but we can do anything we want in grading as long as we also do the thing that is required of us.
So we just talked about grading for more experienced users. As we wrap this up, what advice do you have for teachers new to BTC that are just about to start their new year?
So I love this question. It's a great time of year. I tend to think about this as a 2x2 grid, right? Because new is sort of interesting, right? So you could be a teacher who's new to BTC, or you could be a teacher who's more seasoned, experienced with BTC, right? Going on your second, third, fourth year. Your students could be new to BTC, but your students can also be experienced with BTC depending on where you work, right? So you could be new to BTC, but most of your students are familiar with it. And it's such a great joy when I get to work with teachers who are like, I don't know how this is going to work. And then they go in and do it, and they come back and they're like, the kids knew exactly what they were doing because it turns out they were doing it last year, or their language arts teacher is doing it, or whatever. So it's like kids are going, oh, this is the third time I've taken a card today, and things like that. So it's never assume that just because it's new to you, it's new to them, right? So just be aware of this sort of, where do you live on this 4x4 or 2x2 grid, right? You may be a new teacher, but your students may be experienced. If that's the case, learn from them, right? Like that should give you lots of confidence. But if BTC is new to you, no matter what, follow the order of the practices in the Orange Book, right? Because it's called Building Thinking Classrooms. It's not called Shazam, you have a thinking classroom. You have to build it, and the practices, our research showed that is the order that the practices should be enacted in. Now, there is some change coming in that because, and I'm doing that work right now, but right now what's in the Orange Book, and it's also that diagrams in the Green Book and the Burgundy Book, which shows the sequence that we should be implementing it. If you are more adept at building thinking classrooms, keep in mind that if your students are not familiar with it, you cannot start with everything. You can start with more than that first toolkit. There's actually a separate framework for you going into your second year, where you're able to launch and defront your classroom and not answer questions. You can do all that on day one. You can thin slice right out of the gate. You can do all that, but it's going to take time for the kids to build up that fortitude, and just be aware of that. The more important thing to consider is, what if some of your students are really adept at this? And I'm using this comment about adept, or some. So this happens more so in Canada than in the US, but let's say you're teaching a blended class, like a 4-5. So your grade 5 students this year were your grade 4 students last year, and you were doing BTC last year, and now you got new grade 4s, and they've never seen BTC before. You got to be really cautious in that space, because what happens is that the diversity is great, and if you just give a task and then the kids who are familiar with BTC just run with it, they're going to leave the others behind, because it's very overwhelming. You know, it took them a whole year to become really good at being a building thinking classroom student. And you need to slow them down. So if you have that sort of disparity within your classroom, where some are really adept and some are not, you need to talk to the students who are adept and pull them back and say, look, we're going to go slow. I know that you're comfortable with this, you're familiar with this, but we need to really just focus on that group harmony. We're going to share the marker. We're going to take time listening to each other. And the rubrics in chapter 12 really, really help with that. So the last thing I'll say is this, and this is probably one of the big developments that I would say has emerged of late. You should not spend more than a week or two in Toolkit 1. If you know what I'm talking about, Toolkit 1, it's in chapter 15 of the Orange Book. It's in part 1 of the Green Book. You got to get past Toolkit 1, right? Is it going to be perfect? No, but get out of Toolkit 1, get into Toolkit 2 and 3, get into those other practices, because that's where the closing practices are. And it's the closing that is so important. And if you spend all your time in Toolkit 1, you're leaving all that unfinished learning on the table. You got to get past Toolkit 1. It's not going to be perfect, but you've up and running, you're comfortable enough that we can move into the other practices and get into those closing routines, because that's where we're converting that thinking into learning.
Thanks, Peter. To talk a little bit about the last thing you just said, you know, if a thinking classroom is meant to be messy, right? You talk about that all the time. I think the whole process may be messy for teachers too. You just have to give it a shot and see how it goes, and adjust and change as you go along. And if you don't do that, you'll never get there. And it really is messy, but in the end, it works out really well, is what at least what I found. So,
and one of the things I always try to tell teachers is that, how many times do you think I've come out of a thinking classroom going, that was perfect? 0, right? 0. But how many times do you think it's happened that a student is sitting around the dinner table that night going, that class was a real disaster today? Like, that's not happening either, right? Like, it's never going to be perfect, but the second time you do it is going to be way better than the first, but not nearly as good as a third. just have to become comfortable with the fact that we are, as Chase Orton says, we are unfinished and imperfect, right? We're just always working on it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, well, thanks, Peter. A couple of, I guess, reminders of resources that are available to everybody. The first two are the ones that Peter addressed today, and that is there's a new book coming out in October, the Burgundy book, which will be terrific. That's one. The other is the Grassroots workshop, which, as we talked about, I've gone through all the way through. It is really terrific. Even whether you've done BTC or not, you've been doing it for years. It was really terrific to as a refresher, and then learn some new things. And then the last is a plug for sort of our own group. We've been doing some what we're calling BTC chats, so various BTC topics. One of us or one of the group members is doing a chat, a Zoom online for an hour. It's just kind of like this, talking about various topics. I did one on grading. We've done one on science. We've done one on consolidation. We did two on new to BTC split by grade level. And we have some more coming up the rest of this month. So if you check out the events tab on the group page, you can watch the recordings of the ones that we've done before. Actually, we've done them for several years in a row. So you keep going back, you'll see lots of them, as well as information about where you find the ones that are upcoming. So you can join either live or watch the recording. So those are some resources available to everybody in the group. Otherwise, thanks again, Peter. It's really terrific to have you here with us again. We love doing this thing. Everyone, you read the comments in the group and in the chat here, and everyone's just so appreciative of having you spend some time with us. So we really appreciate it. My pleasure.
And nobody has to do this alone. Like, this is one Facebook group. There's representation from the language arts group here, from Tammy's here, from the K-2 group, right? Like, there is a community for you where you can do this with other people. And it is so important to do that. So take those opportunities. Thanks for inviting me.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.